All right. Well, we're only 3 minutes late. That's not bad. And welcome, everybody, and belated Happy New Year. For those of you who don't know much about the Guild, you can learn all about the Guild on our website. And also, we're on Facebook, and there's a lot to learn from the Facebook page. In addition to finding out about things about the Guild, we also have notices from various other local historical groups. So we recommend that to you. Also, you find out about joining the Guild, which is a good thing. It's an inexpensive membership. At our board meeting, the treasurer reported that we remain in the black, but we operate primarily through membership revenues, so memberships are an important thing. We always have a few people who forget to renew, so check. If you haven't renewed your membership, please do so, and those who haven't joined, feel free to join. And you note also you have the option of a lifetime membership of $250. We now have 31 of those. So I think we're doing well with people who regard the Guild rather highly. Our most recent event was the Pacific Northwest History Conference, and that was all free thanks to membership revenue and also support from the Seattle Public Library, who made the facility, the whole library, available to us. Fort Culture, and also the Washington State Historical Society. Those are our three sponsors, and we're grateful to them. It was an all-day event on a Saturday. 119 people attended. We had 16 presentations and 2 lunchtime workshops and 3 panel discussions in the afternoon. So it worked out very well. We were very pleased, and I think those who attended were also. The State Historical Society will give a history conference this year, and then the Guild in 2025 will be in charge of the conference. So we alternate. We've been doing that for a number of years, and it's worked out very well. Our October speaker, for those who missed, was Sean Scott. His book, shown here, is getting very good reviews. Keep a lookout for Sean. He's speaking all around town. He's a very good speaker, and we recommend him to you. And one of the things we do, it's always a pleasure to present the Pacific Northwest History Award. It's kind of for lifetime achievement, and you'll no doubt see some people on this list that you've seen before. Some names may be familiar to you. And for our November meeting, for those of you who missed it, we gave the History Award to David Martin. He's the 2023 award winner. He's the curator for Cascadia Art Museum. Which one might say, gosh, I mean, what's that got to do with history? But he has been for years an independent arts researcher, writer, curator, and a historian, and he's documented the art history of Seattle and Pacific Northwest art since 1986, and has brought to the public a number of women and people of color whose art was well known and well regarded in their day, but have since been forgotten. And also in the LGBTQ community, artists from back in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, who have kind of disappeared. And so David has been responsible for bringing all those people out in the open and having show after show at the Cascadia Art Museum. And we had our meeting at the museum, which was great fun. About 80 people were there. So there were Guild members and Guild friends, and also people that were friends of the museum. So it worked out very well. Now our February meeting is going to be David Nicandri, who is a former director of the Washington State Historical Society, and he has a new book that's coming out. He was our Guild's 2003 History Award winner, speaking of the History Award. And I told you it's a Lifetime Achievement Award, but along with many others on that list, once he got the award, he didn't stop. His lifetime continued, and he's doing good things. So he'll be talking in February. And then in March, we have Danica Miller, and there's more to come about that. David's working with her to find out what she will be talking to us about. So keep looking, and we'll let you know. For those events and for tonight, the way we ask questions is we use the chat function. And there's a little chat button down at the bottom of your screen. And so you can type in questions. And when the panel tonight is done, David will kind of monitor that and ask questions of the speakers. And tonight's presentation, you may remember before COVID, we used to about every year have people from the research community talk to the Guild about, what's going on out there. And so David has invited tonight's speakers to resume that helpful tradition. So David, I yield to you.
Thank you, Jim. Welcome, everyone. It's great to have so many people here tonight for what sure will be an interesting and thoughtful presentation. As Jim said, it's focusing on research in the great research institutions around here. I've been fortunate over the years in my work to have worked with all three of what I call the A team. Sorry. Humor will only get worse from here on out. But I've been lucky to work with all three of these women at their institutions. And one of the things I think that is special about Seattle is that we do have so many places that have the records that help us understand the stories of the place where we live, or if we come to Seattle. And so for me, that's just very important. So what we're going to do is each of them is going to talk for about 10 to 12 minutes, a bit about what's going on in their institution. And then, as Jim said, we will open it up for a Q&A. If you have a question during the talk, my suggestion would be is to put it in the chat, just sort of a nice way to think of it as a storage area, as a memo box for that. So what I will do is I will introduce each person, and then they will speak. And we're going alphabetically. So we start with Anne Ferguson, who has no E at the end of her Anne. She is the curator of the Seattle collection at the Seattle Public Library. She previously worked at Yale, Cornell, and the University of Washington. She grew up in Seattle and is a fourth-generation Washingtonian. And despite what some might think, she is not related to Hugh and Jane Ferguson, which is where she works. So what we're going to do is Ann Jenner is going to start the slideshow because she has that technology, and Ann Ferguson will talk. And I request, if you are not on mute, please mute yourself. It's all you, Ann.
Okay, great. Well, thank you everyone for being here tonight. I'm delighted to be able to share a bit about the Seattle collection. For those of you who don't know the Seattle collection, it is part of the Special Collections Department in the Seattle Public Library. It is located on the 10th floor of the Central Library, and you can see from the picture here that it's actually a spectacular place with these beautiful windows. So it's a wonderful reading room that we have up there, in addition to a major part of our collection. And the next slide, please. The room is called the Hugh and Jane Ferguson room. That's because the donors, Hugh and Jane, made the space possible for us. The collection holds a wide variety of material related to Seattle history. Now, the further back in time, the more broadly we collect. So when Washington was part of Oregon Territory, we will collect some Oregon Territory. We have things related to the exploration of the Northwest coast, but our primary focus is on Seattle proper. So we do have large collections of sheet music, maps, menus, photographs, all related to Seattle history. Okay, next slide. I guess third slide. There we go. So I was asked to talk about what are some of the recent developments that we're seeing in research at the Seattle collection. And I would say, without a doubt, the biggest is that we have many researchers now coming in and looking at Seattle history through a racial lens. There had been some of this before, but the increase is notable. Much of it is looking at, the racist past here in this area, and the discrimination and exclusion of Blacks from so much. And as you can see here, restricted residential communities, the racial restrictive covenants, students of color not getting what they needed. Congress on Racial Equality, helping to establish freedom schools when the school boycott was on. But there's a lot of work going on to really explore all of this and document what has happened. So that's a big piece. And we see that from scholars coming in who are working on books, students writing theses and dissertations, but also high school students, undergraduates who are looking at various topics of Seattle history through this lens. Next slide. But I did want to say that in addition to looking at sort of the dark part of Seattle's history and the treatment of Blacks, there is also a lot of exploration going on, sort of the celebration of Black culture and history and the arts. And that's really been a wonderful thing. It takes a lot of digging to bring up some of this, but there are a lot of researchers who are interested in this. And so we're finding that is an important part of sort of the new areas of research. Next slide, please. In addition to people exploring experience of Blacks, Seattle history, there's also interest in other ethnic groups, Japanese, Chinese. There's a lot of interest in the international district and how that has changed over the years, and a lot of looking at businesses run by Japanese and Chinese early citizens. So that's a big area of exploration going on right now in our collection. Next slide, please. Another area which has been ongoing, I've been at Seattle Collection for 10 years, and there's been a strong interest in women's history, but it is increasing, and there's a lot of digging into earlier 19th century, early 20th century women's history. And some of that is because more things are becoming available online. It's making it easier for people to do some searching in newspapers and so on. But, you know, someone was researching Belle Baldwin, was one of the early female Seattle physicians. There was the Medical Women's Club of Seattle, exploration going on about that. Suffrage history has been important. We have the newspaper Votes for Women. People are exploring that, looking at aspects of that and digging deeper into that. So this whole women's history is a whole nother area where we're seeing a lot of growth in terms of the number of people doing that research. Next slide. Another big area is the changing urban landscape. And obviously, there's been a lot of research on when the ship canal was going in, things with the Duwamish, all kinds of things, but people are really looking at what's happening now. I mean, it's interesting to see what people are coming in to look at. The Vulcan big two apartment complexes up at 23rd and Union, I guess it is. People have been trying to explore how did that happen? What's being done? What's being torn down, especially in the central area? So that's a big issue. And also people in neighborhoods are, as they dig down into understanding their neighborhood, they're realizing the changes in roads and landscape that went on, and they're documenting that in many ways. So that's another area of research that we're seeing. Next slide. Seattle architecture. That is a big one for a number of reasons. We have, as I'm sure UW and Mohai probably have, lots of people doing house history. And as many of you know, there is a 70-page document that talks about how to research a building in King County. And that's one that we use all the time with researchers. We do have this 10 steps towards the history of a house, which is also used. But this is a big area of exploration, and obviously Historic Seattle and other people who are trying to help landmark buildings, all of those research we're getting in and digging deep into trying to make a case for why some buildings need to be protected. So Seattle architecture, churches are a big area of interest with many people. Early schools, early buildings. So it's a big area of interest right now. Next slide. What's been an interesting change is we've always had people coming in interested in their particular house and sometimes a little bit about their neighborhood, but there is much more digging deeper into different neighborhoods. Part of that's what I was explaining about how has the landscape changed. People understand that what they see now is nothing like it was before in some cases. And we had the Neighborhood History Project. It's part of our digital collections. That is one of the most heavily collections used in our online digital collections. We also have the Neighborhood History Resource Guide, again, very heavily used because that's a big area of research that we're seeing consistently. It's been that way before. I think during COVID, more people were writing to get help from us, and we were directing them to some of these tools and resources. And I think that has helped expand the interest in some ways. Next slide. One area that has also I've found to be expanding in terms of people's interest is anything related to social and political activism. And people, like, for instance, we just had someone come in writing their thesis on the WTO protest. So we have material related to that. They're looking at the archival collection, and other students and researchers are exploring sort of what's behind some of the protests in Seattle. So that whole area is becoming, is expanding in terms of who's coming into the collection to use the materials. Next slide. An area that I really love and that's been ongoing is theater and music. And also the arts. And you mentioned David Martin, and he's been a heavy user of the Seattle collection. And that's in part because we have these artist files, Northwest artist files, where all kinds of material related Northwest artists have been collected. That's still heavily used. But we have seen further interest in material that we have related to early theater and also early music. But I have to say grunge, and that period of music is still heavily used, the materials we have, and there's still folks coming in all the time to use those materials. Next slide. So I would say that what's been interesting for us is to see not only the changes and of sort of deepening focus on certain areas, but also we're seeing younger people coming into the collection as well. And that's been an interesting piece, an interesting change as well. So it's been a nice change because we like the fact that we've seen younger people. Because we're a public library, sometimes people stumble upon us because they come up to the 10th floor library and they find the Seattle room. So we've had some people wander in, younger people find it, and then end up digging deep into a particular subject. All that to say, though, the Seattle room is open by appointment, and it's Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays from 1 to 5. And we would love to see any of you there. And there's lots more to our collections. We have aviation collection, maritime material, all kinds of things. So I hope if you haven't been to the Seattle collection, you will come and we can show you some of our special things.
Great, thank you, Anne. Exciting to see all those various topics. And of course, anyone who studies landscape change is cool in my book. So next up is Anna Elam. She is the Library Collections Manager at Mohai's Sophie Fry Bass Library, overseeing the collection, including focusing on increasing access to materials and growing the diversity of stories in the collections. Before joining Mohai in 2018, she worked in museum librarianship at the Seattle Art Museum and with local history projects for HistoryLink and a teaching assistant teaching American History federal grant program. Anna has a joint degree in archival administration and an MA in public history and MLIS from the University of South Carolina. So Anna, thank you for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thank you, David. Thank you so much. And so it's fun to hear from the two Anns as well. And I think some of the things I'll say will be similar and some will be just a little bit different. So just to start, the Sophie Fry Bass Library, actually go ahead and advance the slide. Thanks, Anne. We're located at Mohai's Resource Center in Georgetown. So just in case you were not aware, there's not room for us at the Naval Armory right there on the water. So we are in Georgetown with plenty of parking. We are also a research library, preserving many of the same types of materials that Anne mentioned, photographs, archival collections, manuscripts, books, ephemera, maps, audiovisual material. We do also, similarly, the older you get, the broader our collection goes, but we do really focus on the Seattle metropolitan region, sort of Seattle, King County, Central Puget Sound region, but we do collect some materials that show the connection of the city to Washington State as well as Alaska. Our most accessed collections are the photograph and oral history collections. So if you're not aware, the big stellar star of our collection is a collection that sort of spans 40 years of donations from the Seattle Post-Intelligencer. So that's a huge portion of how researchers access our collection. And our archival holdings, kind of include the gamut. So business and organization records, personal papers, other documents and materials. Next slide, please. So like Anne, I've kind of summarized some themes of research over the last several years. So I'm going to kind of group it as sort of these national themes that we see locally, and then talk about some kind of specific sort of more local stories that we're seeing coming up. So I just have some examples here, but some recent research requests, really looking at how national stories play out here in our region. We had a researcher who was looking at the trips of the Great White Fleet and how local communities greeted them. So looking at that story of battleships coming through in 1908. We continue to get requests for Seattle during World War I and World War II, but really specifically, I think, kind of drilling down on how these wartime stories impact various communities. Just showing here some recent requests for sort of African Americans stationed at Fort Lawton. So looking at Blacks in our region who are living here, but also different groups moving through the city as the point of embarkation. We continue to sort of always see a lot of requests for photographs and other materials around the experience of Japanese American exclusion and incarceration during World War II. So looking at the experience of, Japanese Americans on Bainbridge being forcibly removed, but also the impacts here in our city. And then we see a lot of requests for our oral histories around life here in the city during World War II. So in particular, we have several oral history collections, but one is the Rosie the Riveter collection. So looking at the experience of women and other sort of communities of color experiencing life in the city at that time. Next slide, please. Similarly, we see a lot of requests for looking at life in Seattle in the 1990s. So the grunge story is perhaps our most requested research topic, and we see people from all over the world. We do have a collection of the Rocket newspapers that's almost an entire run, and we get a lot of requests to access that. We also have a lot of, several collections of music poster ephemera that does also get accessed. And similarly, so a lot of requests for looking at the WTO protests, some ephemera, but mostly photographs. Next slide, please. We also work with researchers who are looking at how major national industries are playing out through this Seattle story. So really, how are these industries showing growth and change, and how they've changed over the years. So in particular, as I'm sure we all have seen in the newspaper daily, but over the last 3 and 4 years, really a lot of folks wanting to access our Boeing oral history collection. We have a project that was completed in 2016 and 2017, looking at the history of the company and change over time. And we have had a number of researchers looking at the culture change over at Boeing access that collection. We also have an oral history collection and some other materials related to Seattle's tech boom and sort of both the kind of information technology industries, but also the gaming industry. And we've had a lot of quite a few researchers working with those oral histories. Next slide, please. So then looking kind of more sort of really locally, we do get a lot of requests from folks. Still, a lot of these topics are not new or, surprising, but really digging into local stories, really wanting to know very specific information. So, the big kind of 3 railroads, maritime and logging. So looking at some of our collections, like for railroad, we have employee timetables, or maritime photos of individual ships, but also larger companies. So looking at specific sites and logging, or the companies themselves. I would say increasingly over the last year or so, are seeing more folks interested in the retail collections that we have for Frederick and Nelson and the Bon Marché. So either looking at photographs of window displays, or programs of various fashion shows, or even employee newsletters. We do also get a lot of requests for some of our food and beverage manufacturing collections. So either looking at various resources around like Crescent manufacturing, either like the little recipe books, or different advertising. We have a collection of advertising specifically around Rainier Brewery, and we get a lot of requests for different information from that collection. So next slide, please. Other Seattle stories, these also, like Anne said on the right, theater history continues to be a big interest, either the whole industry or the whole kind of history of theater in Seattle, or someone researching a very specific theater. We know Alaska Yukon Pacific Exposition in Century 21. There have been books written, we've celebrated anniversaries, but we continue to get people who I think, like Anne mentioned, are really looking at the complexity of the stories. So we recently got someone reaching out to research this very specific story, as you can see here with this photo, about this transcontinental auto race, but looking at a man who was with the quote unquote live exhibit of the Igorot indigenous people from the Philippines, and really seeing how this interaction was playing out at AYP. Next slide, please. And similar to what Anne mentioned, we're seeing increased interest in stories of diverse communities in our city. So how are these communities experiencing change and growth? How are we talking about them in more nuanced ways? How are we making sure, or how are researchers not just focusing kind of, say, with Indigenous peoples on the beginning of Seattle's history, but how these communities are experiencing change over time? So photos and videos of Coast Salish peoples or local tribes are quite popular. But also, like I said, not just focusing on the early story or the fishing protests, but more diversity of experience. How are people communicating about changes in their community? Just like Anne said, buildings in the International District, that community experiencing change continues to be a question we see researchers exploring. Scenes from the central area. So a major collection we have is the Al Smith photograph collection. So if you aren't familiar, Al was a Black photographer who worked in the central area from kind of mid-century on through the end of the 20th century. And we get a lot of people accessing that collection, somewhat for change in the central area, but I would say more so for what are people's lives like. So experiencing joy and family and community, or he also took lots of pictures of the jazz scene. So those are two very kind of research stories that a lot of people have interest in. We continue to see interest in individuals in the Scandinavian American community, so looking at specific stories, but I would say it is tied to kind of broader themes about community and change in our region. And then more specific LGBTQ stories. So I think, for example, recently we got someone who wanted any information we had about the first gay, I guess, publicly gay doctor in our region. So some stories around some of those themes. I also added some slides, as David suggested, potentially, just to talk a little bit about how we're growing our collection and how we are trying to work in partnership with researchers. So if you can go to the next slide, Anne, I do want to talk about some of the things we're working on at MoHi. So we do collect, as I said, stories from the Seattle and central Puget Sound region, kind of the mid-19th century to the present day. We are also, we recognize that MoHi is underrepresented in our collection are groups from historically marginalized communities. So we've identified specifically what that means. So people of color, Indigenous people, gay or queer people, trans or non-binary people, immigrants not from Europe, refugees, people with disabilities, minority religious groups, working class and low income people. So these groups are priorities for us for collection. We are also looking to gather more recent history. I don't think it's really a surprise. to people here that kind of, it takes a while for people to realize that old stuff is important. So we are looking to grow that our collections. Can you do the next slide, please, Anne? So some of that work, as I mentioned, this photograph here in the middle is a photo from the Al Smith collection. So that Black photographer I mentioned earlier. So there are larger collections that we are working with people we have relationships with. But then the two posters on the right are materials we purchased from artists to document what's happening in our community today. So documenting efforts to kind of respond to anti-Asian hate happening in the CID district, or documenting workers' rights in our city. And then the program on the right is part of a collection we recently received on the Imperial Sovereign Court of Seattle, an LGBTQ fundraising organization. We received a donation of artifacts as well as ephemera and some photographs for that from someone in that community. And then if you can go to the next slide. So I mentioned working in partnership with our community. We actually have an annual Curators Fellow we started a couple years ago at MoHi, where we offer a $5,000 stipend to a researcher in our community to do research in MoHi's collections specifically and prepare a public presentation offering new insights on our materials and Puget Sound history. So it's about 20 hours of research over a 6-month time with a presentation as well. And we really do want to prioritize stories of historically marginalized or excluded communities. And it is open to not just academic researchers, but community historians and researchers, which was really important to us. If you can go to the next slide, we've had 2 of those now. This will be 2024 will be our 3rd year. And it's some really exciting research has come out of these and some really, I think, interesting ways of thinking about our community. So our inaugural fellow in 2022, Brittany Frantis, researched and analyzed photos in the Al Smith collection that I mentioned earlier for how these photographs demonstrate Black world building and really looking at Black joy in the central area and the Seattle community in the mid-20th century. And then last year's Curator's Fellow, Linda Lee, looked specifically at 2 artifact collections from women in immigrant communities, Lillian Gundip from the Chinese American community and Ann Dulian from the Jewish American community. She compared these 2 stories and really looked at what's not really being told and what can be told through these artifacts. And both of those are available on MoHi's website, and they're really great presentations. I strongly encourage. You can go forward. Sorry, 2 more now, Anne. So the Curators Fellowship is open. This is a little bit of a shameless plug. It closes next week. If you have an interesting topic, please go to this URL where we would love to see proposals. It's honestly one of my favorite things we do at MoHi. So please do check it out. And then if you can go to the next slide, Anne. We are, just like Anne Ferguson said, we are open to research, also by appointment. So we have time to make sure we gather everything for you. You can come down to Georgetown and do research, or we can do virtual appointments. Please do reach out. We don't hold this stuff for ourselves. We hold it for all of you to do really interesting things with. So we look forward to hearing from you.
Great. Thank you, Anna. And
thank you, David.
Ann Jenner, who has been controlling all of this, now has the power for herself, has served as curator of the University of Washington Library Special Collections Pacific Northwest Collection since 2012 and is a super fan of the Historians Guild. Yay! You may be familiar with the History Keepers Free Community Archiving workshops that she co-created in 2016. An upcoming workshop will be held in Kent in February 17th with which will focus on how to start your history collecting and the role it plays in telling your family and community stories. Anne also serves as board chair of the Swedish American Historical Society, which will be hosting a lunch and lecture at the Swedish Club on May 9th with a talk by Jennifer Atterbury from Idaho State University on the role of community legends to form and maintain heritage and cultural identity. Before having Anne speak, just some people have been putting questions in the chat, so I appreciate that. Don't forget you can do that. And Anne, it's all you.
All right, thanks so much. Thanks for having me speak tonight about the UW Special Collections. First, I'll do a brief overview of who we are, where to find us, and some changes, and then share some news, promote some exhibits and events, and then talk about a few of our collection areas that are of interest to researchers currently. But I also will sprinkle in mentions of new collections that are either ready or that are coming in that I also anticipate will be of interest. The Special Collections Reading Room is located in the lower level of Allen Library South, which is part of the Suzzallo Allen Library on the Seattle campus. Pictures here. Oops. Happening. Okay, but we're also online, where you'll find links to our Finding a Database, Archives West, and our library catalog and other search resources. Of interest on this slide is our new practice of asking researchers to request appointments in advance. Many of you have been used to popping in and requesting a box, and we no longer have the capacity to serve researchers at the moment like that. But an added service is our virtual reading room, where you can also make an appointment, but you can view items in a Zoom meeting through a document camera with the aid of a staff member who will turn the pages. So check out those details on how to make appointments on our homepage. In other news, it was announced on July 11th that UW Libraries will welcome Julie Tanaka as our next Associate Dean for Distinctive Collections, which includes Special Collections and International Studies. Julie will come to us from her current post as the Director of Special Collections and Archives at Occidental College in Los Angeles, and she'll start her new position on April 1st. So that's really exciting news. And to piggyback on the grunge interest, the Rocket has gone digital. John Vallier, UW's ethnomusicology archivist, and Jessica Albano, head of the library's newspapers, government publications, and maps department. They both helped in the effort to get the Seattle magazine digitized and made available online. The Rocket obviously was a Seattle music and entertainment magazine. It published over 300 issues from 1979 to 2000. And it was the first publication to cover our local grunge scene. And then you know what happened then. So really exciting new resource online. In other news, blockbuster film Boys in the Boat has inspired a new digital collection. It contains photos, official programs, even the one from the Poughkeepsie Regatta, maps and ephemera, documenting the journey to the Olympics in 1936. And other items in this collection are the related UW yearbooks, which are digitized, the Thais, varsity letters, and the campus and team photos, and it also includes a shot of the workshop in the back of the famed Shell House, where they're building the boats. Excellent collection to check out. Along with that is our Boys in the Boat pop-up exhibit, which is up until February 2nd. It's on the mezzanine level of Allen Library North. And there's a timeline that includes photos and publications from Special Collections and even period rowing equipment, courtesy of Pocock rowing historian Al McKenzie, who also served as a rowing consultant for the film, as the slide says. Other exhibits that I'm going to talk about are current. Is our beautiful exhibit featuring items from Special Collections for magic and mystery, exploring the supernatural in Special Collections. That's in the main gallery in the reading room. It depicts local folklore and mysteries, 19th century spiritualism, and even TikTok tarot trends. And as noted here, there's a special event on February 14th called Tarot for Friends and Lovers. It's a class held by Anne Lally and Abigail Vasquez and requires registration in advance. In our lobby, there's an exhibit on foodways and cuisine and print that goes for the entire year all the way through November. It's changed out, and there'll be new materials that come out of the collections each quarter. And it's inspired the theme for our open house, which is next week on Wednesday, March 31st at 5:30. And we're going to be bringing out materials mostly related to food history in the region. But there'll be other things as well. And after the magic exhibit is over, the new one is going to be on graphic novels. The medium is message. It's inspired by the 25th anniversary of the Persepolis publications. So along with those texts, we'll show graphic novels and items related to local and regional stories that are told through that genre or that format. And now I want to talk about research and some new collections. So there has been a boom of language revitalization programs within Native American and First Nation communities. So the UW's Indigenous Linguistics and Anthropological collections are in demand. These are recordings, audio recordings, photographs, and field notes that were done by researchers starting, I think, from Melville Jacobs back in the 20s and 30s. So, and then all the of his academic descendants since then. Requests pour in all the time, all times of the year for digitized content to build up language resources for teaching and learning in those communities. Luckily, this coincides with our efforts to digitize and preserve at-risk outdated media formats, all the magnetic media, open reel, tapes, etc. And we have the support of our library's preservation department to do this. And then there's another effort with a large CLEAR grant to digitize our collections for the Plateau People's Portal. So this really takes up a lot of a lot of people's time in the department, but it's very exciting to serve these communities so meaningfully. There's a new collection documenting the women's movement in Seattle. It's going to open in March. It's the papers of Barbara Winslow, and she'll be in town speaking for the opening, and she'll be speaking on her new book as well. Significant scholar and person in the women's movement. We continue to work with what was once called the Northwest Lesbian and Gay History Museum Project with their oral histories. And this collection includes, lots more than 100 histories that have been collected between 1995 and 2012. During that period, there was a lot of hesitancy to deposit these within a repository, but things have really loosened, and the community really wants their story to be told in a mainstream repository. So we're really happy to host those materials. Most of them have recordings and there are transcripts. There's no plans to put it online at this time. Collections related to the early settler years of the region are always of interest. It's just never going to go out of fashion, but there are new ways I think people are looking at these collections. There are a couple of projects related to Ezra Meeker in the works. Those papers get used quite a bit. And the papers related to the Denny Party and their narratives about their experience are being examined now by students from American Indian Studies classes, which is an interesting new eyes, I guess, on that story as told by the members of that family and the community during that era. There's research happening on the social, political, and labor activist Anna Louise Strong. We have an amazing collection of her papers, really beautifully described, and it gets a lot of attention. And within our civil rights collection, the records of the American Civil Liberties Union of Washington are called on quite often. And we do work in collaboration with that office to get permissions and have them vet things so that people's stories and identities are protected, but the history is made available. Painter and all-around creative Wesley Weir, who some of you know, his papers are recently popular again. And photographer Chris Benyon's collection is an important asset to our theater researchers. We seem to be adding more Benyon holdings by way of receiving the collections of theaters like Empty Space Theater and the records of the Intiman Theater. And on a related theater collection note, we have just received the records of the Bookit Repertory Theater collection, or Repertory Theater that recently closed, and they're really working to preserve that history, which is, you know, from our era for sure, and will definitely be used. And the papers and photographs and drawings of Seattle architect Benjamin McAdoo have been processed, and they're requested regularly. It's an exciting collection that has gotten a lot of use and is impacting research into Black history, and also just preserving the legacy of his architecture around the city. The papers of our elected officials continue to interest researchers. Most requested are Magnuson and Jackson, but also on rotation are those of Jim McDermott and Rock Adams. And there are other leaders' papers who are in our collection, and they're frequently pulled out as well. Continues to be people just examining the role of those leaders and the influence that they've had on their eras. Oftentimes, little known projects within the communities they serve will be documented in those papers, but they didn't necessarily get preserved within the papers of the community itself. So there's little nuggets of historical materials in those records that the staffers saved in folders for us. And the University Archives provides often much needed resources for staff across the university who are tasked with doing research into their own department's histories. Not a week goes by where someone isn't looking into their own department's records, and luckily we've done a great job of preserving that. The life and legacy of Henry Suzzalo is in vogue for sure as we gear up to celebrate the 100th anniversary of Suzzalo Library in 2026. And this will also be a time to celebrate the great architect Carl Gould. And we've recently received additional historical materials from the Gould family that are in our processing queue. It's going to be exciting to see what kind of new tidbits come out and can be either made into digital or in-person exhibits. So finally, a reminder to do your research in Archives West, in our library catalog, in our digital collections, and our other search tools that are on our website before you request an appointment. Schedule that appointment to access collections in our reading room or our virtual reading room. You can find our open hours and days. We're open every day from 1 to 5, basically, by appointment. And the virtual reading room hours are sometimes a little more flexible than that. Oh, and you can also request a consultation, a research consultation that can take place on Zoom or in person if that can help your research. So we hope to see you soon.
Wow, outstanding. So now you know why I call it the A-team. Fabulous work, amazing to hear what's going on, and particularly to see just the incredible diversity of information that people seek and telling those stories. So there are a variety of questions, and one was, and specifically to Anne Ferguson, does the Seattle Room have information on Black musicians unions, and are there newspapers about activities of Black groups or musicians specifically?
Yes, I could, whoever's asking, I could provide more detail. We actually have a researcher who's studying unions in theater unions, like stagehands, backstage folks, and looking at people of color as well as part of that. But yes, we do, and I could provide more details about that. It would depend sort of what they're looking for. We have some material that might be appropriate for what they're looking at. So one thing I didn't mention was, we have on the Seattle Public Library's website, on the homepage, it says Ask a Librarian. If you click there, you can send an email and just go ahead, whoever this is, and just send an email and say, this is for Ann Ferguson, and it'll come directly to me.
Great, that was Valerie asking the question.
Oh, great, yes.
Another question was posed to all three of you. Do you charge for commercial use of your photos, for example, reproducing in a book?
What I'll say is, at the Seattle Public Library, we provide our an image or whatever they're asking for free of charge. It is up to them, whoever is receiving it, to determine what the copyright issues are and if it can be used. But we do not charge, which
Great.
is unusual for many special collections.
Yes, so we do charge at MoHI, and that's because we have a digital image technician, and that is, a way to keep us in the business of being able to provide these services as a nonprofit and not government funded. But please don't ever let cost be a barrier. Please do reach out to us and describe your project, and we'll see what we can do. But yes.
Same with us, and our prices are actually published on our website in particular for the different formats that are requested. We don't charge tribes and First Nations for reproductions of materials related to their languages. Those are we're really standing behind supporting them in revitalizing their language programs. And so we bend over backwards to make that happen. But we do work with them when they have grant money to spend, and they often do receive grants, and we're happy to take that if they're, if they don't have other things to spend that on for the grant, if it's particularly for reformatting and receiving copies of materials. And then that goes further throughout the communities because we often, the languages are not necessarily tribal specific. They often are relevant for many communities. So they're happy to share when they get a grant.
Great. Anna, I think this is one for you. There's a question about the PI collection.
Yes. What's the question?
Did you say you have a PI collection?
We do. Yes, so we have as early as the 1970s, the Hearst Corporation was donating photographic negatives to MoHI, and they have, subsequent donations through when the paper went to online only in 2009. And at that point, we did get the sort of old print morgue, the print subject files. So we have everything really from plate glass negatives through digital photographs on CD. Kind of covering that span. I will put the one caveat that we don't have everything. As we all know, no one's archiving is 100% perfect. And I've heard stories of photographers occasionally grabbing things back. But reach out to us if you are looking for a photo from the PI. There's a good chance we would have it.
Great. Another question was to all three of you. Have you been getting more inquiries from further afield since you joined DPLA? And someone could translate what DPLA is for those of us, Jen, who do not know.
It's the Digital Public Library of America. And at this moment in time, MoHI is not part of it. We hope to be in the future, but I'll let the other Anns answer.
I don't know that I can say that I can correlate any particular increase to that. We get requests from people all across the country and internationally. And that is also in part because Special Collections also has 2 genealogy librarians and who are amazing. And that's, you know, as we're talking about underrepresented groups in terms of Blacks and Native Americans, our 2 genealogy librarians help a lot of people who are trying to track some of the genealogy, which is very hard in some cases. In any case, so we already get folks from everywhere. So I can't say that DPLA, I'm guessing yes, but I can't say for sure.
Yeah, I have no way to know. I don't think we have any way to know at this time where our traffic is coming from.
Okay. It is 2 minutes to 8, and I'm going to keep going because everyone seems to have so many questions. If you want to drop out at some point, hopefully the 3 Anns will be willing to hang out for a few more minutes. The question was asked about where can I find information on the Korean immigrants community, and are there internships or volunteer possibilities for high school students?
So the second part is internships in our collections, in our departments. Is that what the?
I don't know. It just says any internships volunteering for high school students. I assume that would be coming into the collections.
Well, I'll say because the Seattle Public Library librarians are in a union, we can have students who are either for class credit or an independent, something that's sanctioned, you know, by the school. Then we can have them come in and do work. And we all say that goes for directed fieldwork students at the University of Washington. But so the volunteer thing is a little complicated because we're set up as with the union.
I honestly don't know what our capacity is right now for high school interns, but I think always call or write to our special collections email. That's a spec call. I can put it in the chat and make that inquiry.
So MOHI, prior to COVID, we had a very robust volunteer program at MOHI, and we do also have a MOHI Youth Advisors, which is more broadly, it's an application-based, but a paid opportunity for high school students that the application opens once a year. But unfortunately, our volunteer program really hasn't started back up post-COVID due to some administrative reasons. I believe we're hoping to restart it in 2024. But the second part of the question about research into the Korean American community, specifically for MOHI, I don't know that we have many materials. My first suggestion would be to go to Wing Luke and find out what information they have or recommendations for specifically for the Korean American community. We have a few photos, I believe, from the PI. We have a few online, but it's not, unfortunately, a strength of our collection at this time.
Okay. Jenna, just a quick question. Is the food exhibit opening on January 31st or March 31st?
The Breaking Bread exhibit is open now, and it's open and through November.
But you had something about an event on either the January 31st or March 31st. You said next week, but the date said March 31st.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, the open house. Did I really say March?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm surprised Lisa didn't pop in and correct me. Yeah, the open house is January 31st.
Okay. I guess so. I'm going to end this. We are running. I have 2 questions I think that struck me as interesting. One is, how do you all cooperate? Like, and the line is, we don't have it, but you might go to. And then the other one is, how do donors decide the best repository for their materials?
Well, that's a really good question. I seem to get a lot of collections from Anna. She sends a lot of people my way.
So what I tell folks is we are a donor ecosystem, right? I mean, we're a donation ecosystem. We all collect together. We do our best to make sure folks can find materials easily. And also we do it within the capacity and resources we have to process materials.
Yep.
So for some of those reasons, I do send folks to UW, because if your collection is too large, or I feel like it would take too long for us to process it to make it accessible, that doesn't really feel appropriate. We are also more specifically located, are centralized on Seattle and the central Puget Sound region. So if your collection speaks to broader Pacific Northwest, I do send it to UW because you're a Pacific Northwest collection. So those are two reasons. But, you know, a strength of ours is really, I think that we also have an artifact collection, and that we do have an exhibit space. So collections that lend themselves particularly to those stories. And I think as a place where that also kind of complement our photography collections, and then you know, some of our industry and technology focus, I think, are a good fit for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're exactly right, Anna. And I do send people to you guys when it's artifact based, or when it really fits something you already have. Absolutely. And I send a lot of people to Anne Ferguson at Seattle Room when it is like so laser focused on Seattle that's where people would automatically go, and that's where it should be. We try to position materials in intuitive places where it's going to make the most impact for a researcher during their visit. I think Anne agrees with that too.
Yeah, and I've referred many, maybe they don't tell you that I've done the referral, but many folks who offer us something, and you're just clearly, UW has the major collection in that area. So,
Right.
and actually, Anna, after hearing more about some of the Mohi collections, I'll probably be referring more folks to you as well. But it is interesting. People, you know, and sometimes people have an idea that they want it in a public library, but I have to tell them, you know, you need to have it. If there's a major collection related to this, people are going to be going there, and they, you know, we're not that far apart geographically, but it still makes sense for materials to be together.
Yeah, and so I'm going to thank all of you again, and also, you know, these are only 3 of the institutions. I mean, Seattle again is very lucky that there's so many organizations out there sharing these stories. You know, one aspect of research, of course, is HistoryLink, and all the work that they're doing. Their online encyclopedia is really unparalleled for a state to have so much amazing information, and so that is certainly another source. You know, there is the Black History Museum, there's the Seattle Archives, there's the engineering, there's Boeing, you know, some of the corporations have them. So, I mean, you should always recognize that there are so many sources here. And I think one thing that's great about Seattle is that our history, being, at least from a post-European point of view, is relatively young. A lot of things were documented in ways that are not documented in other cities. So we have, again, really sort of unparalleled access to the stories of this place. So once again, I'd like to thank you, and then I would like to then turn it over to Jim Roop, who is our fearless leader in yellow.
Yes, really. He's referring to the background color. If I have the white light on, it just shines on my glasses, so I gave up. But you know, we were talking, David appropriately talked about HistoryLink, and we should take a moment and congratulate Jennifer Ott, who's the new director of HistoryLink. After all her many years of service with HistoryLink, they recognized who else could lead it better. So congratulations. The other thing I wanted to mention is when Eric Larson wrote his book, Devil in the White City, if you look at the acknowledgments, he thanks the University of Washington Libraries for all their assistance. And if you talk to Eric Larson, he will tell you that if you go to the East Coast and you go to a library and you're doing research, you're really kind of a bother to them. They're not really that interested and helpful. But he is the first one to say, if you come to Seattle, you're going to get helpful people who are there to help you, and you're not imposing on them at all. And that goes with all of our 3 people who are here tonight. So many thanks for all your help. And with that, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much. See you next month.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.